I was one of the people who were saddened when BMW went from a rear-wheel drive 1 Series to a front-wheel drive car. Back then, the move was seen as somewhat controversial, but at the same time, BMW was the only automaker to offer a rear-wheel drive car in the segment. With the first generation front-wheel drive 1 Series, BMW wanted to make it look like the rest of its lineup, even though its shorter nose and different proportions gave away the fact that it was actually front-wheel drive. But it didn't seem to matter for the buyers. The 1 Series still sold excellently. I mean, there's two of them parked right there. Now BMW has given the 1 Series a major overhaul, and the result is this, the F70, which is basically the same car. It has the same wheelbase, exactly the same wheelbase, but with new fascias, some new details, new engines, and a completely new interior that does away with most physical buttons. There's been a lot of controversy about this car, with people claiming that the front end looks like a Kia, and I may have been guilty of that myself. But now, getting a better look at it in person, I really like the way this car looks. I don't like the fact that in all versions except the M135, they hide the exhausts under the bumper, and the M135 gets a quad exhaust system with real exhausts. But this car that I'm driving today, which is an M Sport Pack 120D, it doesn't have visible exhaust, although it does have these really snazzy 19-inch wheels and blue painted brake calipers for the optional M Performance brakes, and this fantastic purple paint job. So do you think it looks like a Kia? I guess the headlights kind of have the same shape, and Kia's tiger nose grille has the same outline as BMW's modern twin kidney grille. But in person, these cars look nothing alike, honestly. This big sensor array helps break up the front end look, and it actually has a bar running through the middle of it that looks 3D but really isn't. And this isn't really a twin kidney grille, it's just a bigger version of Kia's tiger nose grille because it's a single piece. It's not two separate kidney grilles anymore. This grille comes in several styles, and this one is kind of unique because it has vertical and slanted bars, and it looks kind of cool. I like it. What I really like about the nose of the F70 is the fact that it has a bit of a shark nose look to it. As you can see, this part is ever so slightly slanted forward, and this edge is really aggressive. And I also like the recessed badge. I think I'm gonna call this the camel toe badge because it looks like something you might see in the Sahara Desert. The side of the car betrays the fact that this is still the older version of the car, but with new fascias. The shape of the windows is identical. The doors, I'm pretty sure, are interchangeable, with this subtle crease here and this more accentuated one here through the lower part of the door that rises. It is identical to the older one that I'm looking at right now. So from the side, what will give this away that it's the new 1 Series are the new colors available for it, the new wheel designs, and also this one logo here on the C-pillar in the Hofmeister King, which is something BMW is doing with all its models, putting the designation here, which I think is pretty cool. This car also comes as standard with the shadow line pack, so you now get glossy black on all surfaces that used to be chrome in older vehicles or just some cheaper looking matte black, but this one looks pretty fancy, even though it doesn't really stand the test of time because glossy plastic can easily be scratched. So as I said, the wheelbase is identical, but the car is about 4 centimeters or just under 2 inches longer, and I think most of that, or all of that, is front overhang, which seems a bit bigger than before. 4 centimeters isn't that much. With the M Sport Pack that's on my tester, it also has more aggressive side skirts that help it look even more aggressive than it already does. Now let's move to the back, my favorite part of the car. I really like the rear end of the F70, much more so than the F40. And I think the new rear lights, which are inspired by those that BMW debuted on the X2, they look great with these separate arrow-like elements. They look really sporty, and I like how they're split here. I've seen some people commenting that they don't like it and they would have liked to see an uninterrupted light element going through the entire light cluster, but I really like this design. I liked it on the X2, but I wasn't a fan of the X2 that much, so I didn't really talk about it. But on this car that I actually like, these rear lights are especially attractive in this hatchback configuration. The M Sport gets this really aggressive looking fake diffuser. It doesn't do much for airflow or performance or anything like that, but it looks sporty enough. If I had this car, I would probably do something about this part here and maybe poke a couple of exhaust through, or a double tipped exhaust, because I just think it makes this car look so much better. I mean, the M135 with its quad exhaust has basically the same bumper, but it looks much better. Just like it's doing with the rest of its lineup, BMW is now emphasizing the first number of its model designation. So this is a 1 Series 20D. Opening up the trunk, the official specs say it's smaller than before. You can get this powered, by the way, optionally. This car doesn't have it. And in this configuration, which is a mild hybrid, this underfloor storage space is actually limited. In non-mild hybrid vehicles, the underfloor storage goes all the way to the back seat. So there's a lot more in there. As things stand, this is a 300-liter trunk, and you can extend it to about 1100 liters if you fold everything down. So my tester is a 120D, which means it has the B47 4-cylinder diesel engine, turbo diesel engine, that's transversely mounted as opposed to longitudinally, like in a traditional real BMW, real in air quotes, because this is very much a BMW and it feels like a BMW, even in spite of the front wheel drive. And I really like the way it drives. So this engine on its own makes 150 horsepower and 360 newton meters of torque, and those are the exact numbers for the 118D, which isn't a mild hybrid. The mild hybrid adds about 20 horsepower, although the official output is 163 horsepower, which is down from the 190 or 200 that this engine gets in other vehicles. I'm not sure why BMW limited it, but it did, and it's just the way it is. There's not going to be a more powerful diesel than this. This is it. It takes the car to 100 kilometers per hour in 7.9 seconds and tops out at over 220 kilometers per hour. There's also a 120 without the I, because BMW no longer uses the I for its gasoline models and now solely reserves it for its EVs. So that becomes the 120, and that's a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder gas engine with a mild hybrid system that makes 170 horsepower. There's also a 118, which is the same engine without a mild hybrid, and there's even a 116i, which I'm not sure what market it's for, but it has 122 horsepower, and it can still sprint to 100 kilometers per hour in under 10 seconds. I think it's a 9.2 second car. The top of the range model is the M135 without the I, which makes less power than before, and it makes less power in Europe than it does in Australia. Here in Europe it makes 300 horsepower, while in Australia it makes 317, and that's because the one we get here on the old continent is slightly choked by gas particulate filter, which also reduces the noise, although BMW pumps plenty of that through the speakers to make you think you're driving a very loud car, which in fact on the outside is actually kind of quiet. This car has some trick dampers, but they are not adaptive. As you can see, there is no cable going into the top of the shock strut here. It's just a rubber thing to not let dust get in there. And they are frequency selective dampers, which change their characteristics depending on road conditions and how you drive the car. So you get comfort when you're just cruising around, and they stiffen up when you throw the car around, which I think is a pretty cool system. Maybe you can retrofit these to other cars. I'd surely like to try them on my own. I think I forgot the 123i, sorry, without the I, so the 123, which is going to be the same engine as in the M135, but in a lower state of tune, and it's going to make 218 horsepower. By the way, if you get the M Sport Pro pack, these are actually open, and they allow air to go to the back of the brake rotors to cool them. I'm not sure if it's an option on the 120D or any other model aside from the M135. Now, given the fact that this car has exactly the same wheelbase as before, you would think that space in the rear is exactly the same, and you would be right. Let's climb aboard. So I'm 183 centimeters tall, or about 6 foot tall, and I have reasonably long legs, but my knees do fit into this recess. If I want to spread my legs a little, I can also do that, and there's still some space here. And I can also slide my feet underneath the front seat, which is really nice because the front seat is set in my driving position, which is all the way down. So there's still plenty of room, and in the driver's seat, I don't feel like I'm sitting too high. There's also plenty of headroom too, so now I'm sitting upright, and I have maybe 3 fingers of headroom, also because of a recess here. There's also an armrest with cup holders, You don't get any type of screen in the back, but you do get two USB-Cs, one of which I'm using to charge my camera because I forgot to do it at home. I also noticed the fact that the materials are really good, so rear occupants aren't discriminated. There's soft touch plastic here. In this car that has the optional perforated leather, which is fantastic and it feels really good. So you get it here where it's soft. This is also soft. This is metal. Yeah, it sounds like metal. And you even get some stitching here. Yeah, sure, the lower part is hard plastic, but it feels super solid. No flex at all. And you get a half-liter bottle holder here and an additional pocket here. The view out is obstructed by this pretty big headrest. And if you get the M135 with the optional seats with the integrated headrest, that blocks visibility further. But I feel like the rear seat is raised somewhat compared to the front seat. And so you actually get a good view out. It's not terrible to be in the back of this car. The driving position is really, really nice. You can get nice and low. I like this new design steering wheel. It's quite thick, like really thick. Even here up top, it's a really girthy boy, but there you go. This is the M Sport steering wheel, which gets slightly fancier treatment in the lower part, but even the base wheel looks very sporty, and I'm very happy about that. So you don't have to get the M Sport steering wheel to get the full sporty BMW feel. You get some plastic paddles here. They are much nicer in the M135, and this one says boost because you can enable a little bit of extra oomph for 10 seconds thanks to the mild hybrid system, the 48-volt mild hybrid. It gets the same curved twin screen array as all the other small BMWs, but these screens are smaller than the ones you get from the 3 Series upward, but they do a good job. I will say that iDrive 9, which is what this is running, and it's a new infotainment that's based on Android Automotive, I've had some issues with it. Like for instance, whenever I turn the car off and on back again, it switches to German. And certainly this has helped me learn German, Tür offen. For instance, I now know what that means. The system itself is fine, but sometimes it doesn't want to connect to my phone. Fahrzeugschlüsselfeld. Okay, don't know what that means. So it sometimes doesn't want to connect to my phone, and sometimes it refuses to load the profile. So in these new BMWs, you have to load a profile. And sometimes it just goes to guest, which is the same in German as it is in English, but it's spelled differently. And I always have to select the profile every single time, or almost every time, and that's kind of infuriating, to be honest. Quite a change is the fact that this car has no buttons on the center console. There is nothing here. You do get some mood lighting. These stripes actually light up at night, as do those, but you can't see them in this bright sunlight, but they do light up. You get a wireless charger with ventilation, which is pretty nice, and an additional drawer here that has a rubberized thing and a ridge. You don't get any physical controls for the infotainment. This is exactly the same as in the X1, the 2 Series Active Tourer. The 1 Series hasn't just gotten prettier in its latest generation, but it's also gotten smarter. So for instance, I can summon it out of a parking spot. So with the app on the phone, I have to tilt it forward, tilt it back. This starts the engine. I can move it forward through my phone, but not only that, if it detects an obstacle, such as myself, it will go around me. Let's see. Maybe if I go this way, let's bring it back a little bit. This is pretty cool. Let's see if it goes around me now. It does. How cool is that? And it's all done through this app, which gained new functionality. The BMW app, it also tells you when the car is locked. It tells you a lot of things like driving statistics. But what really makes a BMW is the way it drives. And considering that this is the improved version of the front-wheel drive 1 Series, let's see if it's any better to drive. And let's see if those trick new dampers make this car not only comfortable, but also sporty. because it supposedly doesn't really have that much body roll. It's worth noting that you cannot get adaptive dampers that you can stiffen up at the push of a button in any of the versions. New to the F70 is the revised reversing assistant that now, instead of remembering 50 meters, remembers 250 meters. And it can also adjust and adapt if new obstacles have appeared since it last recorded the reversing run. It records it when you go forward and then remembers it when you go back, and it reverses for you, and it goes around obstacles. And if it's a curved road, it will also follow the curve, so you don't have to. For me, the tech is secondary, especially in the BMW. But what I really want to know is how quick this 163 horsepower 2-liter engine is. So sprinting, let's put it in sport. Put the gearbox in sport. Pull the boost pedal. And let's go. It's reasonably quick. It feels a bit quicker than 163 horsepower, to be honest, but it's not massively quick. And I'm sure that with a light tune, you can get this car to 200 horsepower very easily and without affecting the engine's longevity. When it comes to refinement, so we're doing now almost 100 kilometers per hour, and it's really rather quiet inside here. The engine is quite muted. You do hear a lot of tire noise, but it's not that bad, to be honest. If I put it in manual, so this car has 400 Newton meters, and about 40 of those Newton meters are from the mild hybrid system. So let me put it in 7th, which is its top gear, and see how well it pulls. This car, by the way, has a new 7-speed dual clutch transmission, which actually bangs through the gears quite enjoyably in its sport setting. It certainly gives you a bit more feedback compared to a regular torque converter. And when you take control of the gears yourself, will it give me second? It won't give me second now it gives me second at 60 kilometers per hour. It's really responsive and pleasant to use, this gearbox. I got this car on a twisty road yesterday, and I was really impressed by almost the complete lack of body roll. You do get some feedback as the car adjusts itself through the corners, but I actually like that. It's much better in my view than a 48-volt system with active anti-roll bars, which completely eliminate body roll. And if you're driving a taller SUV with that system, it's quite weird and disconcerting, especially if you're a driving enthusiast and you expect and want a bit of lean. The torque is definitely there. It feels like 400 Newton meters. So let's put it in 7th, which is its final gear, and at 100 kilometers per hour. Let's see how well it pulls. 120, 130. Yeah, it's quick. And the thing is, you know, people demonize diesels these days, but I'm a fan of the old oil burner because there's nothing old about it these days. The B47 is a truly fantastic unit, and it actually makes light work of this car, even in spite of the lower state of tune that BMW has put it in for this 120D application. This new generation of 1 Series also has improved ADAS capabilities. So not only can it maintain a safe distance to the car in front, but it can also keep you in the center of the lane, and it even has a lane change functionality. I will say that this car definitely feels firm. There's no getting around it. With these 19-inch wheels, some might say it's overly stiff and it doesn't ride bumps particularly well, some of them, the really big ones, although the dampers are really great and they seem to do a great job of mitigating some of the harshness that you would expect from such a stiff suspension setup and big wheels combo. So that was a pretty big speed bump that I intentionally took at higher speed. And the frequency-selective dampers did their job there. I really like this car. I think it's one of the best front-wheel drive cars you can get today. I think it looks great. I don't think it looks like a Kia. Well, mostly. It does have the Kia Tiger nose. Or did Kia copy BMW's dual kidney grille and kind of integrate the two grills into one, and then called it its own, and then said that that is the Tiger nose grille? I mean, there's no secret behind the fact that Kia and Hyundai, they employed a lot of Germans to help them make their cars feel sportier and bring their quality level up to, well, the European brands, frankly. The car isn't quite perfect though. So the infotainment still needs some work. It feels a bit buggy and strange and laggy at times. It worked better in the iX2 that I drove. I got none of these problems, like the phone not connecting, the profile not loading correctly. So my tester, with all the options on it, which is around 13,000 euros without VAT, so 16,000 euros worth of options, and it costs 54,000 euros, which is a lot for a front-wheel drive BMW, but it doesn't feel like a cheap car. The interior feels better than before. The exterior looks better than before. Arguably, I think it does. I mean, once you see it in person and once you get used to the ever so slightly unusual headlights, which no longer have the dual halo design, they just have two bars. I really like diesels, and I like this diesel in particular. It pulls nicely. This car still has a bit of torque steer because of all those Newton meters, but I like that. I think the torque steer adds character to a front-wheel drive car. I do think there's a bit less torque steer than in the previous model, and it certainly gives you something more to do behind the wheel, you know, to correct the wheel going to one side, to keep the car pointing in the direction that you want it to point into. Driving this car is really fun. The steering is just as sharp as you would expect from a BMW. I don't think it's a variable rack, but I could be wrong. It doesn't feel like one. And there's plenty of precision there. I've mostly kept the car in sport, with everything in sport, because since you can't change the suspension stiffness, there was nothing for me to put in comfort. The DCT changes really nicely. I like this car. I'm having fun in a front-wheel drive diesel. Granted, it is a BMW, but this just shows BMW's technical prowess, that it is able to make a wonderful front-wheel drive car, even though it lacks the experience that some other manufacturers have in making vehicles with this configuration. You can get the base car, which I think in Europe is 118, for around 30,000 euros, and the M135 costs over 50, and with a few options it nudges 60 and goes past it. So that car is the only one you can get with all-wheel drive. But frankly, I think you should avoid all-wheel drive for this car, because it adds extra weight and complication and cost, and they are things you don't need in an entry-level BMW. Because for the previous generation of the car, for the F40, I drove both of the hot versions. So I drove the M135i and I drove the 128 Ti, and it was the latter that I preferred. I drove both of them on twisty roads, but the Ti was a nicer, sweeter handling thing, the real enthusiast pleaser of the two, and that's the one I would choose, even though it has a lot less power, 268 horsepower versus over 300 in the M135i. So yeah, the F70 is a great car. I like it. You won't go wrong if you buy it. It drives better than all its competitors, and it doesn't look like a Kia. Thank you for watching.